We're back live with you tonight, John in Focus, and thank you for staying on. The South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights has dismissed the Tripartite Alliance's protest action against the parole of Janusz Waluś as childish. The organization, whose application to join arguments on the parole was dismissed, says focus should be on a review of the parole system in its entirety. The court said its application fell beyond the scope of the case. Founder and CEO of the organization, Golden Miles Bhudu, joins us now to elaborate on their position. Miles, good evening. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. The South African Communist Party saying the ruling by the Constitutional Court is an attack on the communists, is a service of serving of injustice. In fact, that is also the feeling of the widow of Chris Hani, that the courts clearly did not take into consideration their state, their emotion, and the fact that they were not properly engaged in a victim-offender rehabilitation process. What's your feeling on this outcome?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, go for it. I can hear you.
Yes, look, we as the South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights went to court with families of lifers, including a lifer called SAPOHR Mudise. We didn't go there as the friend of the court. Well, at the Constitutional Court, they call us friends as intervening parties. We went there not to support Janusz Waluś to be released on parole, because according to us, Waluś should have been released from prison almost 15, if not 10, and the latest 5 years ago. If we read and understand the Department of Correctional Services release policy and the parole regime. We went there for a prayer or two. One, to plead with the Constitutional Court to transform the release policy and the parole regime, because it is outdated and it is of such a nature that politicians can at any given time interfere with that release policy, including the parole regime. In other words, you'll get the executive interfering with the criminal justice system. We, in fact, pleaded with the court, but unfortunately, the court dismissed our applications and told us that we must go somewhere else. We went to the wrong address. But our struggle is still continuing, because there are tens, if not hundreds, of lifers that remain behind bars after they have qualified according to the Pantheran 1 and 2 judgment, the Opapata judgment, and the Van Wyk judgment. Now, those judgments indicated that if you were arrested and convicted before the 1st of October 2004, you have to serve only 13 years and 4 months and then be considered for release to parole. But that did not happen because, in fact, the executive interfered with the release policy and, in fact, resulted into tens and hundreds, if not thousands, of lifers still remain behind bars, including Mkhonto Esizwe, Apla Caders, and Azandla Caders.
Are you arguing for, or at least did you want to argue for, a prison sentence that is life without parole? Is that what you would call for?
No. Well, this is not the United States of America. This is the Republic of South Africa, and, you know, things happened in the Republic of South Africa. Remember, the democratization process in this country was negotiated, and it was not done through a barrel of the gun. In fact, countries throughout the world, during the heydays of the Nelson Mandelas, whose soul must rest in peace, they, in fact, went around the world and showed the world how South Africa became a miracle. So we cannot allow a situation in a country where the criminal justice system is crippled, is broken, and is bleeding, to let people go to prison without an option of parole. That can maybe happen in 100 years from today, when South Africa is not the state where it is now, because it has fallen apart and it is nothing else than a criminal state.
But what the ANC, the SACP and its alliance partners are arguing for, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, it's not their exact same words, but it does seem to say they want a particular standard to decide which defendant deserves to eventually be eligible for parole and which doesn't. And in this particular case, the assassinator of Chris Hani is that individual who they feel, as per the standard, should not be a deserving defendant.
The Tripartite Alliance came very late to this party, because the Tripartite Alliance, in fact, they start communicating in a proper and a professional manner after the assassination of Chris Hani, because many of them in the South African Communist Party, in the ANC and COSATU, know something why Chris Hani had to be taken out. One amongst others, Chris Hani discovered during the negotiations in CODESA that some of his comrades were capitalists by night and communists by day. In other words, Chris Hani found out afterwards that his comrades were busy betraying the revolution of economic freedom, political liberation, and he denounced CODESA. And then thereafter, he had to be taken out by hook or by crook, because some of his beloved comrades were getting and negotiating free shares worth millions of rands with white monopoly capitalists, amongst others the Ruperts of this world, the Oppenheimers of this world, the Godsels of this world. So let's not go to that kind of argument. The Tripartite Alliance is now using Chris Hani's soul that must rest in peace forever to try and resurrect themselves from the grave, try to resuscitate relationships amongst themselves, but they cannot do that on the expense of the late revolutionary, because they've got an idea why he had to be killed.
So you are, of course, saying you want the regime of parole changed because it's prone to be abused by politicians. What exactly are you calling for? Do you want to incorporate it in the regime, a no guarantee for release, or at least a more stricter and more stringent process that would allow for one to be released on parole?
In fact, we start right from the day you get arrested. We are calling for a transformed South African police service that must be trained and not retrained. They must be trained from scratch. It should have happened 28 years ago so that they can oversee a democratic state. You see, the apartheid police were trained to oversee a very brutal apartheid state, and it worked for them against us. And then from there, if the police is well trained, well taken care of, well remunerated, it is only then we will start to see that the laws of this country will start to work in terms of safety and security. Then we go to the courts. We make sure that the magistrates, the prosecutors, the judges, the assessors are people who understand what it is to preside over a democratic, non-sexist, constitutional democracy. And then thereafter, you have a Department of Correctional Services that would make sure that if you are arrested, charged, and prosecuted for a crime you have committed. I'm not talking about people who sit in prisons for crime they've never committed. When you are in prison, the Correctional Services must execute its mandate, and that is to correct by means of investing in education, training, skills development, so that you get to the buzzword called rehabilitation. After that, you make sure that the rehabilitated project is reintegrated, it is monitored, it is evaluated, and it does not get lost in the system. Only then can we start talking about a criminal justice system in a country that is crime-free. Currently, the country is a failed criminal state.
That was South African Prisoners Organization for Human Rights CEO Golden Miles Bhudu.